Hello. Welcome to the Ozymandias Project. Trireme Transit, the newest and most reliable state-of-the-art time-traveling transportation service, is now boarding. We are now departing present ponderings. Next stop is Ancient Odyssey.
Hey everyone! I had the pleasure of sitting down this week to chat with my good friend Jordi Alonso, who is currently a grad student at the University of Missouri. I hope you all enjoy this episode, and I will speak to you next time. So Jordi, I know you have a background in English. I'm really curious. How did you develop your interest in classics? Because I know you really like fauns. So, tell me a little bit about that.
Well, thanks, Lexie. I was an English major in college and then got my MFA, Master of Fine Arts in Poetry after that. Now I'm at the University of Missouri getting my PhD in English. Ever since I was little, I really enjoyed mythology. And as someone who grew up speaking both English and Spanish at home, ended up learning French at school as my actual second language I learned, and then studied French, attuned to the fact that, the Greeks and the Romans spoke these languages that were not languages we spoke anymore, modern Greek accepted. 8-year-old me had no idea. Long story short, right? I was interested in mythology and whatnot. And then when I went to college, discovered that English majors were a thing. I went to Kenyon College, and our English program is rather renowned. I ended up sort of focusing more on English, but I did still take a lot of classics courses.
Once you sort of got into the classics rhythm and you discovered, hey, these classes are amazing. What was it about fauns specifically that you were like, oh, I have to study these? Because, I feel like that's not really, I definitely think you're the first person I met who just was like, oh, I need to study this.
Sure. So that's a funny story, actually. My best friend in college, we've been best friends. One day we were just chatting. We'd meet up for tea or coffee or whatever after a long day of being an undergrad. She basically said that she was a nymph, and then one thing led to another, and it was like, well, I hang out with you a lot. What creatures, right, hang out with nymphs a lot? Well, fauns. I mean, on our phones, I'm on her phone, I'm faun, and on my phone, she's nymph. From there, I started just sort of looking up poems to send her that mentioned nymphs and fauns. So this was literally just going on, Wikisource or some sort of repository of literature. And I started noticing that, especially in the 19th century, everyone, what major poets, minor poets, poets I'd never heard of, what are they doing? They're writing about fauns, or they're writing about nymphs. First, it was just sort of poems I would send to Mara, just because oh, look. And we started coming up with this sort of personal mythology. I jokingly say, oh, I'm a faun, so I do X, right? You're a nymph, so you do Y. There were these little bits and pieces in published poems in the 19th century that backed up these fantastical ideas that we'd come up with. One of the has stuck in my head for the last few years is nymphs and fauns aren't human, so their blood must be colors, right? Being silly. Then there's this, he wrote a verse drama called Nyctalop, late 19th century, right? And he's got this line, faun is dying in the forest or whatever, and his blood is purple. We'd been playing around with color symbolism. And I used to tell, I'd tell her all the time, oh, your heart is purple. Personal mythology of, not that it was foundational to the friendship. Ideas we just made up one day. And then we kept having those ideas be reinforced. I said, well, look, I was applying to grad school at that point. And I said, well, I don't really know what I'm going to write my dissertation on, right? Again, kind of jokingly. It was well, you've been hitting these things we'd made up corroborated by the historical record. Not that it's a historical record and I'm Schliemann trying to, dig out Troy, but it was our personal historical poetic record was being reinforced by these creatures. So we were sort of just joking around that we had ancestral memory. Fauns have weird colored blood. Nymphs do this. It's a really long story, sorry.
Yeah, no, I think it's really fun and really interesting to see, really sort of how and why people fall into these really niche sort of categories, because it really is a very niche branch of study and an even more niche branch, profession. After you knew that you wanted to study this, though, how did you go about looking for a program? Because I think so much of the issues that a lot of us who love any type of ancient field find is that not a lot of schools either offer a program that kind of services our own needs, or if there is one, they tend to be at institutions like Harvard, Brown, Hopkins, UCLA, so very exclusive places. Did you have trouble kind of finding a spot for you? Did you look specifically for a program, that would let you study these fauns, or did you kind of say, oh, I'm just going to go to a program and I'll carve out my own spot there?
Sure. Well, I figured at that point, I wasn't really sure how to sell the idea. Hey, random English program, you don't know me. Let me do this thing. I could not name I wasn't going to say I'm following in such and so-and-so's footsteps, because last I checked, I was kind of blazing my own trail. I just applied to English programs, and I was like, I'll study 19th century poetry, both American and British. What I later learned was called transatlantic 19th century poetry. And, one thing led to another. And then once I got to Mizzou and I got to know professors, I kept, when we read things in seminars, I'd be like, oh, do you all know that this poet we just read has like a nymph poem? Let me just gush about the nymph poem in my seminar paper and during seminar, right? So that I kind of like believed myself to be a nymph scholar in training before everyone else did. And then when they were like, oh, this nymph or this faun showed up, even if I wasn't in that class, they'd maybe, email me and say, hey, did you, we just found this nymph, right? And since you're the nymph person, we were behooved to let you know. So does that answer your question?
Yeah, I think that's great, because it kind of mirrors what a lot of us did. I feel, I wasn't set on exactly what thing I wanted to study, but I feel like a lot of people, unless they know, because they either got lucky, they had a parent or a family friend who was in one of the ancient fields, or maybe they, watched a professor and just learned from TV. But a lot of us kind of seem to sort of almost back our way into classics or whatever field it is. So you almost kind of stumble in very happenstance, like it's almost like a mistake. And then you find yourself and you're like, oh, I did not know this was a thing, but I'm so glad I'm here. So I deeply, deeply feel that, because it happened to me as well. I came to Mizzou as an anthropology major, just because I didn't know, go study ancient Greece. All I knew was I love ancient Greece and I want to go study it. And so, that first time that I went and talked to the advisor, she basically started and was like, okay, so tell me what do you want to study? What do you want to do? Because I'm going to help you make your class schedule. So everything that I proceeded to describe to her, she had this look on her face where she was like, oh, what? So then, I was like, she looks very confused. That's not a good sign. So eventually she told me, that's nice, what you want to do, but we can't actually help you do that here. We're a little more broad and you have to take all these classes that it doesn't sound like you'd enjoy. What you're looking for is our classics department. And then she proceeded to write down and give me the name and email of the advisor, and then met with him the next week. And I asked all the questions, and then boom, like that's what I wanted. So I feel like, a lot of us have that kind of experience where we're like, oh, okay, well, one way or another, we end up where we want to be. How we get there is very different, which I love. What do you think, we could maybe do to make these programs a little more accessible to people, just because, it's so hard to figure out something exists, what is there anything that would have made it easier for you to find classics?
Right. Well, so up until now, I've just sort of mentioned how I was in the English department, right? I'm a student in the English department. Part of the English Graduate Student Association and so on, taking a creative writing English class right now. And I just started taking classics courses. So I was like, I need to know not just a little bit of ancient Greek. I'd had some Latin before in undergrad. And I was like, clearly the Romans got their nymphs, right? And their fauns from the Greeks. And I thought, what's one more language? I already speak English, Spanish, and French. And my Latin was bad, but it was there. I'm like, let's just add another language. Like you said, kind of backed my way into the classics department. And now, but sometimes people are a little astonished when I say, oh, no, I'm just not an interloper in a bad way, right? But like, oh, no, I'm a metaphorical card carrying member of the English department. And actually what I'm doing this semester is preparing an application for a master's program in classics. As far as like how classics, I think, could be more open and more democratic, I think part of it is that we don't always in high school have classics program. You have, of course, you study English, you study math, etc., some foreign language, French, Spanish, Mandarin, whatever. But you don't really study Latin. You don't really study Greek until you get to undergrad. I walked into my first Latin class in undergrad. I was familiar, with how languages work. And like, I knew there were Latin classes, but somebody who isn't already into classics, even if they don't know that classics as a discipline exists. I think a way that we could get more people interested in it is not necessarily by focusing on what they call, the grammar translation method. Like, here's a passage of Aristophanes. You have to parse every single word here and tell me which verbs are in which moods and which tenses, etc. You could introduce people to classics by being like, do you guys want to hear about fart jokes that are 2,000 years old? Make fun of philosophers? Why, yes, I would. Maybe that shows a bit my childish sense of humor, but we read a section this morning where these two characters are talking about how Socrates is a really weird human because all he does at the Thinkery, right, the academy, all he does at the Thinkery is come up with answers to these questions like, do gnats, are they humming when they make that noise? Or are they just like farting their way through life? No spoilers for this 2,000-year-old play, since it's kind of, scatological humor. What the answer is there. So, I mean, like, if you read a play or you tell this story of Achilles or something like that, and you're like, okay, so there's this story that's been really pivotal to, Western, like there's a lot of art about it. There's movies, like if you want to see Brad Pitt shirtless, here's a way you can do that. And you can start there.
Yeah, and I think, I love how you brought up Brad Pitt and Troy, because that segues perfectly into, I think that, in addition to it being so important to really start telling kids and teaching them about classics and all the great philosophers, historians, as early as high school, I think the added layer of importance here is that so much of classics is embedded in our culture, and it's really spread through, especially, modern pop culture, films, TV, books, music even. And so I love that you brought in the Brad Pitt example, because the Brad Pitt 2004 Troy just is like the most popular example most people can think of. I'm curious though, what other, popular books or TV shows or movies can maybe you think of that would be kind of a good intro into the ancient world? Maybe even if it's not perfectly accurate for, the time. It's just, we've been brought up with this in our culture. So, can you think of, what were some books or movies that you saw and, are either directly an adaptation of an ancient myth or story, or that was based on it?
I grew up with, it was a rather slim hardcover book. It was basically like a retelling of like book 2 and 3 or something like that of the Iliad, catalog of ships, but it was a picture book. Not exactly perhaps written for children, right? But it was like this gorgeously illustrated thing. Movies, I grew up in the 90s, so Hercules of course. The Disney movie. I had a crush on Megara. I don't know if that is relevant to this conversation or not.
I think it could be. I think everything that gets you into that world is completely
So,
relevant. So
right. So and it wasn't like Meg probably spoke Greek, therefore I must study this, right? But it was the music, the idea that like I've never really been into the war fighty side of. I recognize those are fun things to watch, fun things to experience. Much more recently, of course, like there's Assassin's Creed Odyssey, which is just, I mean, I know we could gush for 5 hours. And you mentioned, without calling it reception theory, sort of that idea, right? And it's a sub-discipline of classics that I'm actually really interested in, where you not only study the text, but then you go and you read 19th century or 20th century or 21st century things like, Madeline Miller's Song of Achilles, Circe, Emily Wilson's new translation of the Odyssey, where she translates in iambic pentameter our English version of dactylic hexameter, right? And she keeps a one-to-one correspondence for the line. All of that's translation, and of course she's an accomplished classicist. She is bringing people who don't sit through the Odyssey, or Madeline Miller, right, sit through the Iliad and read the story of Achilles, and modernizing the stories while at the same time keeping a strong link to if you want to know more, you can read Homer. Wake Siren, Ovid resung. So it's Wake Siren : Ovid resung is the subtitle. And she takes Ovid's Metamorphoses to give some love to the Romans. And she tells stories about all the women and female creatures who were metamorphosed because of non-consensual desire of some god, probably, Jupiter. So McLaughlin has a story that really hit me, was her version of the Arachne story. In Ovid, Arachne is a human weaver who is really good at weaving. So Minerva says, "Oh, you have committed hubris because you said you're like better than I am." And then there's the challenge, right? Minerva challenges Arachne. Arachne's weaving is really good, but when the goddess of weaving challenges you to the weaving contest, you don't need a poet to tell you how that's going to end.
yeah.
So what McLaughlin does is she gives Arachne, she gives Daphne, really think of any, classical heroine, and chances are you can trace her back to the Metamorphoses, right? She gives them agency, and she sets the book. So this could be a story that happens right now, or you could be reading a story about, ancient Corinth. The stories are super short. They're told in a very contemporary and yet still very poetic. It's not a novel in verse, and it's a feminist retelling of Ovid, which I really feel like we just need a feminist retelling of pretty much everyone. These are ways to sort of, I think, grapple with, and I feel like I've kind of gone a little bit off topic here, but classics sometimes, I think, we've got the perception, right? Classics, an old white upper class man's game. Think of your stereotypical Oxford or Cambridge Don. So there's this perception we have that a friend of mine who is the head of Lupercal, a Latin reading group for women and non-binary folk, put it wonderfully the other day when we were talking. She said, this is Sky Alta, surely. She said that oftentimes in Latin classes, right, we'll be super focused on the grammar of a particular passage without necessarily thinking of the consequences of being hyper-focused on the grammar without considering the context. Example, there's a non-consensual pursuit on the part of Apollo. He has the hots for Daphne. Daphne did not consent. She, in order to escape, prays to the nymphs of I think it's the Alpheus River, if I remember correctly, to save her. And what they do is they transform her into a laurel tree, and Apollo now is associated with the laurel because he physically tears her body apart. Same with Pan and Syrinx, the nymph. Pan has panpipes because Syrinx, a nymph, was running away. Same story. She can't get away, so she's like, I need some control. She becomes a bunch of reeds, and then Pan takes her as an attribute because he literally tears her body apart and makes beautiful music by blowing through her body, right? So these are very non-consensual ideas. My friend was mentioning, right, how like sometimes we're just too hyper focused on the grammar. Who's the object of that sentence? Oh, it's Daphne, right? Daphne is the one to whom the action is being done. And then we don't stop to talk about the repercussions of using a very non-consensual action and just being like, oh, treating it like a grammatical exercise. Daphne is the object of that sentence. We don't talk about how that makes us feel, right? So you're just reading about these characters being acted upon against their will. It could leave you, it could turn you off from classics, right?
I think, there's definitely that element where, any number of these stories has the power to turn someone away.
Right.
But, I think overall, though, almost everything classical history, whether it's myth that's, debatable, but, I think it's hard to come up with new things, new ideas. So we do try to take the examples were provided, and then we can expand them, we can change them a bit, but that does not change where they come from. And so what you mentioned to this aspect of you have to be careful because we do have a lot of popular film and literature that could bring someone in. I grew up with the Percy Jackson series, completely a positive experience. I loved it, as did I'm sure many people all around the world.
Yeah.
The aspect of influencing us in certain ways, that's not just, hey, this is a thing, come love it. That is really impactful kind of on the state of the world. What I mean, I guess, by that is because so much of our society is built upon ideology, and that comes from a lot of these ancient cultures, looking kind of at how this has influenced modern politics, modern ideology. Do you also see some parallels, with some of these ancient stories that you mentioned, and how that may have shaped, how our society was built? Like what ideas maybe come from here, teach us? I think of, Aesop's fables, which debatably were based on Greek myth first. We use those to teach our children lessons, shaping our idea of what it is to be a good person, or what you should or shouldn't do. Yeah, I just want to get in a little bit, about how we see this influence us one way or another, into kind of how we ended up where we are.
Right. To restate your question, to make sure I've got it, you're asking like, how have these ancient societies like influenced us today?
Yeah.
Our ideas, what is beautiful, what government buildings should look like, white marble with Ionic columns, right? Or some kind of classical column. We've got that because of the neoclassicist movement in the 18th century, where they were like, those columns and the white marble, like, it looks very august. It makes us feel like Greeks and Romans. Let's build our courthouses, our banks, our etc. Let's build them in that style, which is not how exactly they looked when they were in use in Rome, in Greece. I'm thinking of like the unfortunate use of like classical imagery by like far right group. They love the fasces, the bunches of arrows tied together, where we get, the word fascism. The fasces is unbreakable, whereas you could snap one arrow in half. They love like the ideas of the Roman, like the aquili, the Roman eagles that were the standards of the legions, right? Stuff like that. They are like, oh, all the statues are pure white marble. And then they form misguided notions of races, etc. They don't do their research and they don't know that polychromatic art. These marble statues are white now, sure, yeah, but they were once painted, depending on the scholars you follow, they were painted in what would seem to us as very garish, bright primary colors.
Yeah, I think, most of these statues and buildings were like almost psychedelic in nature, which
Right.
definitely shocks everyone I talk to.
Right. So, I mean, I find it really shocking, but in a good way, right? Because you think you know, and then you realize I went to an exhibit last year, back when we could travel, at the Kelsey Museum of Art and Archaeology at the University of Michigan. There was a whole exhibit on ancient Greek paint making. So not only did they talk about how the paint was made, but like how it was applied, etc. That really just transformed my understanding of Greek art. And the reason I sort of brought up like these, far right groups is that they're holding up Greece and Rome as these white ideals, because the remnant of Greece and Rome in our popular mindset, in our popular culture, are the white marble of the Apollo Belvedere, or the white marble of the Venus de Milo, etc. These are white right now, yeah, sure, because they were weathered. Paint will fall off a statue if you make it rain hard enough. So these ideas are maybe hopefully not held by a large percentage of society, right? But by a very vocal percentage of society. And I feel like we should fight back against these kind of perceptions.
Yeah, and I think that's so fitting. Because I was literally about to ask you, we do have this kind of scary moment in history where we have a big resurgence of, fascists and ultra nationalist parties and these ideologies. They're really coming to the forefront of anyone's memory for a very long time. And a lot of them do kind of misappropriate a lot of ancient symbols, especially from, the Greco-Roman world, which as a classicist, I find absolutely so saddening and whatnot. But also, I think, there's that valuable lesson that, especially people in the humanities and people in classics know, which is you should have the full understanding that these were not perfect societies. You should understand the nuance that went into this, not just the idealized version that a lot of people seem to want to take a hold of. So I truly believe that to solve a lot of the world's problems that we're confronted with, it's a very interdisciplinary sort of thing that we're going to do. And, I think that ancient scholars are going to be vital to helping guide modern, political scientists and economists and whatnot sort of find their way around, how to implement modern solutions to modern issues, but still using history to sort of guide to make sure we stay away from, hey,
Yeah.
this might have already been done. So, kind of with that, would you sort of say then that it's almost as important to fund humanities programs, especially in the ancient disciplines, as it would be to fund STEM? Because I know we're living in this age of everyone's being pushed toward, you'll get 1 billion scholarships and discounts, study STEM, because it's so important. We need that.
Right. Definitely agree. And, I think STEM is important, but I've heard dichotomy between like the humanities on the one hand and STEM on the other is a little artificial, right? You could hypothetically study what a bunch of scholars in Alexandria in Egypt were doing with the science of their time, right? So you could do humanities and focus on STEM. I do not do that, but I do think that we should definitely fund the humanities, but then instead of thinking of STEM as a separate field, right, all the way over there, we should think of being STEAM powered. That is to say, adding the A in the middle of STEM there for art in the sort of the broadest sense you can construe it, meaning the humanity, medieval Latin world, the liberal arts were not poetry and things that we might think of as the humanities, but you had astronomy, rhetoric, mathematics, things like that. And these were the artes liberales, the liberal arts, right? The arts befitting free people. Most of those were things we would think of as like science. You've got, linguistics and math and astronomy. But what I'm saying is that, yes, I completely agree. We should definitely fund the humanities and also integrate, like you said, an interdisciplinarity of things where you can be a classicist, you can be an English major, you can be, humanities based field you want to study, but then feel free to take not only from the other fields in the humanities to engage with fields outside of them, right?
And I think that it's so true because, just because you may want to, I hear a lot of people saying, oh, well, I love studying the ancient world and classics sounds fun, but I can't get a real job. I need to be a lawyer. And can you think of how many different maybe job fields and things that would benefit from a classics background? Because, my argument is don't be afraid to major in this at the collegiate level because it leads into so many different fields. Can you think of any that would really benefit from maybe if you're scared of majoring in it, maybe a double major or a minor?
Sure. I mean, I think you mentioned law. Most terms in law are Latin, pro bono, quid pro quo. What is classics, right? What do we do in classics if not sit with a text and obsess over whether that is a dative of attendant circumstance, ablative of means, or whatever in Latin, for example. And post-baccalaureate fields encourage attention to detail, whether you're an interior designer or you're going on to law school or you don't need to remain in academia after you major in classics.
Yeah, I mean, I think definitely there's just so many, and I think there's too many fields to really be able to pinpoint here and sit and be like, obviously this is so odd, because classics definitely teaches people in so many different ways. It teaches creative thinking, which can be applied to just everything in life, just creatively for you as a person, as your own development. It's, classics is such a great journey for everyone that's going to affect everyone differently. So what I want to do, I love the namesake of my podcast, the poem Ozymandias by Percy Shelley. My favorite poem, and from what I know of you, it is also one of your favorite poems. I would love it if you would read for us the poem, and then just what is the message of this poem? What is it trying to tell us?
Sure. I met a traveler from an antique land who said, "Two vast and trunkless legs of stone stand in the desert. Near them, on the sand, half sunk, a shattered visage lies, whose frown and wrinkled lip and sneer of cold command tell that its sculptor well these passions read which yet survive, stamped on these lifeless things. The hand that mocked them and the heart that fed, and on the pedestal these words appear, my name is Ozymandias, King of Kings. Look on my works, ye mighty, and despair. Nothing beside remains. Round the decay of that colossal wreck, boundless and bare, the lone and level sands stretch far away."
Beautiful reading. Beautiful. It almost, I swear, I really get so emotional every time this poem is read. But yeah, so this poem evokes such strong imagery and also, subtle messages. What does this poem mean to you?
I think, being literary Egyptologist myself, I think it shows us that, right, we don't, as scholars of the ancient world, amateurs of the ancient world, lovers of the ancient world, we know that we do not have complete object texts most of the time. Not having the complete version of it doesn't mean that the fragments are not worthy of study, worthy of admiration, worthy of being brought back into the present, not just sort of left in our distant past, but remembered and spoken of and written about in the present. So.
Yeah, no, I mean, this poem, it's very complicated. What I love about it most, it doubles as a metaphor both for political power kind of a reflection of humans' own hubris, and if we look at it from that kind of lens, does it change how we feel about it? Is it like a warning almost? Or is it an Aesop's fable of sorts where it's you have to read it and then think about its meaning? It's not straightforward.
Well, I think it's kind of a memento mori, right? Remember, you will die. Ozymandias says, "Look on my works, ye mighty, and despair." And yet his works are gone, right? Presumably the city or whatever it is gone, and barely his legs have survived, and his face is cracked and physical space away. Yeah, like, don't be too cocky. Time will get you.
Yeah, I
show myself.
Yes, no, definitely. And I think this poem is applicable to everyone everywhere. When I read it, just because of the unique times that we're living in, I can't help but think of this is such a good message for where we are as a country, whether you agree with the current government or not. Anyone who knows me would probably know where I stand on this as well. This is, just it kind of goes into, this is why some of this ancient material so impactful, it's so important. And it always shocks me when I see people who are high up in either government or the world. I'm sure their education was amazing, but because don't place emphasis as much on teaching and reading the ancient materials, and if you do, you're going to read the more stereotypy, okay, well, everyone loves Achilles, so let's just read the Iliad and the Odyssey. More films and adaptations of these things. But when it comes to slightly more obscure tech, I find it very interesting that so many people, especially in the current government, would benefit from reading this poem. And I would hope that they would sit and think about its messages, because it really speaks to me, I think, and I know it speaks to you as well.
Let's try to get this podcast up and running so we can send it to Washington then.
I sincerely hope that more people will find enjoyment and really come because it's fun, come because we get to talk about fun subjects, we get to talk about what we learn from these things, about a shirtless Brad Pitt in Troy.
Yeah. And who doesn't want to talk about that, right?
Who doesn't want to talk about that? Or I would love to see some sort of adaptation of any of Aristophanes' plays, because those are paid such lip service.
Be out there somewhere, right?
Somewhere. Well, maybe we'll find it. If any of you listeners out there know of any adaptations, please reach out to me and send them my way, because I would love it. But thank you so much, Jordi, for joining me on the podcast today. It was so fun to talk to you. I could talk to you for hours longer. I always enjoy our conversations, and I hope that everyone listening to the podcast will enjoy it as well. I will leave some of the links that you may have brought up in the podcast in the show notes, and thank you so much.
Trireme Transit is now departing ancient Odyssey. Next stop is Present Ponderings. I met a traveler from an antique land who said, 2 vast and trunkless legs of stone stand in the desert. Near them on the sand, half sunk a shattered visage lies, whose frown and wrinkled lip and sneer of cold command tell that its sculptor well those passions read, which yet survive, stamped on these lifeless things, the hand that mocked them, and the heart that fed. And on the pedestal these words appear: My name is Ozymandias, King of Kings. Look on my works, ye mighty, and despair. Nothing beside remains. Round the decay of that colossal wreck, boundless and bare, the lone and level sands stretch far away.